interaction with aviation. But actually it would have been much more appropriate at that time to teach submariners another thing to hit fast targets in a free zigzag without a miss. Unfortunately, at that time it was difficult to organize. There were no fast and maneuverable ships targets. We had to learn how to attack enemy ships on a zigzag, and even going in a strong guard had to learn already in the hard days of the war. Not at once, but we learned it too. Hundreds of fascist ships with troops and military cargoes found their end in the abyss of the sea from the blows of Soviet submariners. Actually, I did not become a professional submariner. So why am I writing about my not-so-long service in the submarine forces? Because it gave me a lot. I got to know this promising class of ships, life of submariners, peculiarities of their combat activity. All this was very useful to me later, when I was in charge of ships of different classes. It never hurts for a naval officer to know and see as much as possible. Such is our naval service. Let the reader forgive me in my story about submariners. I got carried away and got ahead of myself. Now I have to return to earlier events. It often happens among sailors. No sooner do you settle down in one place, and you are already waiting for an order about a new assignment. This is how the year 1926 began for me. Having parted with Sevastopol and having collected my belongings, I went to the city, famous for its shipbuilding plant. Here was being completed light cruiser Chervona Ukraina, to which I was appointed senior navigator. The cruiser was commanded by NNN Nesvitsky, remember, whom I met on board the Azad in 1919. Not without reason believing that Nikolai Nikody would recognize me at once, I entered his cabin. In the barracks, a large, almost empty, very uncomfortable room without special ceremonies, and loudly introduced myself. Nesvitsky, who was reading a newspaper, slowly put it aside, took off his pince-nez, and squinted. The eyes on his full face turned into small beady ones and looked at me coldly, as if they were surprised at my stupid smile. He took the prescription leisurely and scribbled in the corner art, PP, and just as leisurely returned the document. I only had to say yes, turn on my heels and leave the room. The letters SP meant to the senior assistant, so I went to him. This position was filled by A.I. Belinsky, a former merchant seaman, quiet, very delicate. He asked me how the commander received me and what we talked about. I wanted to say Nesvitsky is still the same, but over the years has become even more unbearable. But I could not allow such frivolity towards the commander of the cruiser and, without blinking an eye, reported. The commander gave detailed instructions. Everything is clear to me, no questions. Belinsky looked at me and smiled understandingly. As it turned out later, NN Nesvitsky received all newcomers in the same way he silently made a resolution and sent them to the XO. Of course, such a meeting did not lift the mood. The Commissar G.N. Kedrin helped. He invited him to himself, had a long talk with the young commander, said about Nesvitsky that he was a man with a temper, but kind, fair, and most importantly, an excellent sailor. The work on the completion of the ship was very interesting. I was at the factory from morning till evening. I helped to install navigational instruments. Together with petty officers, I studied the steering device and its switching systems. Perhaps, only at the factory you can feel every screw with your own hands. At sea it will not be possible. Finally, the ship is ready. We are preparing for sea trials. In those years, the ship was commanded by the delivery captain of the shipyard during the state sea trials. Factory workers and engineers stood at the machines and mechanisms. We, military sailors, only watched and learned. And of course everyone watched with both eyes how the mechanisms and devices entrusted to him worked. After all, we received them from the plant. The delivery captain was P.I. Klopov, a former naval officer. He perfectly managed the cruiser and thoroughly familiarized NN Nesvitsky with the character of the new ship. The tests went well, and after the completion of the interior decoration of living quarters, was signed an act on the entry of the cruiser into the fleet. In a solemn atmosphere, we hoisted the naval flag, Gusi and pennant. The crew moved into the ship. It was pleasant to enter the rooms, which still smelled slightly of paint and varnish, where everything shone with newness. The wardroom cabins and sailors' cabins looked smart and festive. In the engine rooms, numerous and colourful pipelines shone with enamel, turbine casings shone, flooded with bright light. Everyone's mood was elevated, festive. The cruiser entered the fleet, but it was still, you could say, a child, which all must begin with the first steps. Learning required time and a lot of work. The huge team of the ship had to, like a well-coordinated orchestra, to acquire a harmonious sound. Tests began immediately. At night, the commander ordered to sound the fire alarm. Back in the barracks were made all the necessary schedules. The alarm raised the people. Everyone quickly dressed, took battle stations, pulled fire hoses. But the water from them still did not flow. Somebody shut off something wrong. Somebody waited for an order, and it didn't come. In short, it didn't work. In the morning, Nesvitsky gathered us, and, as always speaking a little on the nose, announced, "All burned. Understand? Mechanics and company commanders to find out what's wrong. I'll repeat the alarm today." That's the whole drill. The commander left, and the XO spent a long time scrubbing us with sand. Some of us got even harder from the senior mechanical engineer, Vasily Artemievich Gorshkov. And for a long time still not everything worked out as it should. The new cruiser was part of a separate division of destroyers, which was commanded by UV Scheltinger. The cruiser was the only modern ship of this class in the fleet, and of course attracted the attention of superiors. We settled on board the division headquarters, and its experts began to delve into all our affairs. Fleet Commander, or, as this position then meant, the head of the Black Sea Maritime Forces, VM. Orlov raised his flag on the cruiser, and even joined our party organization to know more about the life of the crew. Well, the flagship specialists and workers of the political apparatus followed the conflot. There is an apt folk proverb, 7 nannies have a child without an eye. And so it was with us. We ourselves had not yet sorted out our own economy, and here from morning till evening we could only meet and see off our superiors and answer their questions. Everyone came to our first artillery firing. We played the battle alarm. The high guests, together with the cruiser's command, moved to the battle deckhouse. It's gotten so crowded you can't turn around. Everyone crowded at the narrow slits of embrasures, looking at the shield on a long cable it was dragged by a large sea tugboat. They laid down on a combat course. The commander asks senior artilleryman AA Grigoriev, who is at the fire control post, through the intercom. How is the distance? Grigoriev is a knowledgeable artilleryman, but his nerves often let him down. We hear his trembling voice. Comrade Commander, I can't get the distance. The rangefinder is shaking a lot. I was standing next to Nesvitsky. He turned grey and very clearly, as if by letters, threw into the intercom. Stop shaking. Do you hear me? Yes, stop shaking. All involuntarily smiled, although we young people in the heart even felt sorry for our quiet Alexander Alexeyevich Grigoriev. The order to open fire was given. The button of the howler was already pressed, the signal on which a volley is made, when the helmsman Kolsanov shouted. The rudder does not work. The commander orders me to repair the damage. But what kind of damage, where to look for it? I'm rushing from one mechanism to another, and the guns are already booming, everything around is rattling. Electrical engineer MI. Denisov pushes me aside, rushes to the steering motors. It turns out that everything is because of a trifle a fuse has blown. The rudder worked again. The ship had deviated only 3 or 4 degrees, but it was enough for all our shells to land not at the shield, but close to the tugboat, which began to buzz frantically. The firing was thwarted. From the upper bridge rattled Orlov's baritone. Outrageous. Denisov and I were hit too. However, we were forgotten as soon as we started torpedo firing. They were held in the Evpatoria Bay, where it was shallower. Fired from underwater torpedo apparatus, his device was clearly unsuccessful. It was installed in the hull perpendicular to the side of the ship, and at high speed shot torpedo experienced strong lateral pressure, which not only affected the accuracy of firing, but could lead to the breakage of the torpedo. In addition, our senior minesweeper OV, Narbert, was almost always unlucky, and this time the torpedo flew out of the device, and we never saw it again. For several hours the patrol boats accompanying us searched the bay, and the torpedo was never found. For a ship it is always an emergency, and the dissatisfaction of superiors was boundless. By evening the cruiser anchored at the Yevpatoria roadstead. Everyone's mood is gloomy. When dusk came, a small dinghy raced up to the cruiser's board, and a young policeman sitting in it shouted, "Comrade sailors, take away your machine from the beach, it is lying and hissing, all the vacationers dispersed." There was silence on the deck, the watch commander S.A. Capanazzi did not risk to report the incomprehensible incident to the commander at once, but he had to. A boat was sent immediately. Our torpedo was lying on the beach, boys were crowding around it. And on the whole beach, not a single holidaymaker. The torpedo was taken to the ship. The accident was liquidated. The bosses wondered what to do with us next. Comflot came to the absolutely right decision. He ordered all the staff to leave the ship, and he himself also moved ashore. The cruiser, in order to work out all its complicated organization, was placed at the disposal of the commander. It was no longer necessary to return to the base every evening, so that the superiors could move ashore. We were now based in various bays and raids near Sevastopol. Day and night went out for firing, solved other tasks. In a month our cruiser became a real fighting ship. It was shooting perfectly conducted all the ship's exercises. Nothing else jammed or burned out. We fired at the shield, not at the tugboat or resort people on the beach. We remembered our first sorrows, and there were more of them than described here, then in the evenings in the wardroom under the friendly and cheerful laughter. Great assistance to the commander in the establishment of the ship's service was provided by the party organization. Communists were painfully experienced our first blunders. At closed and open meetings thoroughly analyzed the reasons and strongly criticized the guilty. Together we thought about the elimination of malfunctions. Criticism was harsh but fair. Commissar Kedrin, truly the soul of the ship, guided our efforts intelligently, tactfully, in a partisan manner. We were sorry when he was transferred from us, but the new Commissar Kaskiewicz retained the style of his predecessor, and we worked with him quickly and well. Thus passed day after day in hard but interesting work. In their free time people rested, did their favourite things. There were many fans of sailing and rowing sports. Often races were arranged, long trips on dinghies were organised. So I managed to go on a 6 from Sevastopol to Odessa and back, and the senior watch commander N.G. Kuznetsov to Skadovsk. We should pay tribute to the cruiser commander N.N. Nesvitsky, he skillfully instilled marine qualities in young people, and was pleased if our dinghies took prize-winning places in the fleet races. We learned a lot from this original man, who seemed too closed and strict. In fact, he loved young people with all his heart and did a lot for them. In those years they made sure that the Red Fleet men wore blue uniform collars on their working dress in all cases. Once, standing on watch, I saw that my helmsman Nikolay Kolsanov was wearing a uniform without a collar. "Kolsanov, why are you breaking the uniform?" I asked him. Nesvitsky was standing behind and heard everything. He interrupted me, stopped talking, and came up to the Red Fleet Kolsanov. "Put on the collar." To my surprise, the sailor cheerfully replied yes, instantly extracted the collar from his pocket and attached it properly to his shirt. The commander smiled and calmly said to me, "That's it, navigator. You should give orders, not talk about why and why not. Then there will be fewer slackers." All of us quickly got used to N.N. Nesvitsky, treated him with respect and love, first of all for his straightforwardness and honesty. He had his oddities, but who doesn't? Once the commissar advised N.N. Nesvitsky to gather our wives and talk to them, to find out how they lived. The meeting was organized without us, on shore, in the fleet house. Nesvitsky did not know how to make speeches, and did not like them. He asked the women at once, "How do you live?" They answered him in chorus, "We live well." The commander smiled, squinted his eyes. "I guess you scold me for letting your husbands go home only once a week." And here my wife distinguished herself. "What are you, Nikolai Nikolaevich?" she said. "We are very pleased. Every other day, as soon as he goes to hydrography on business, he runs home. has lunch, rests, and only at supper time goes to the ship. They are the lucky ones, an envious whisper ran through the room. I don't know what the other wives said, but on my return to the ship Nesvitsky announced to me, "Sturman, a week without shore." When I tried to find out why, Nesvitsky cut me off. "Ask your wife." In the fall began large and small fleet-wide exercises. The fleet was solving the problem of repulsing landing parties. We had more forces both at sea and in the air. Blue were usually designated by the cruiser Comintern and gunboats. They were attacked at sea by submarines deployed in positions and aviation red, and then at night 3 or 4 destroyers. At dawn, the cruiser Chervona Ukraina, together with coastal batteries and torpedo boats, finished and drowned the landing force. During the exercises, we usually had on the cruiser the head of the Black Sea Maritime Forces VM, Orlov. It was a very colourful figure, the son of wealthy parents. He entered the law faculty of the university, and during the First World War, like many students, was drafted into the Navy and enrolled in separate midshipman classes, preparing for 3 years of naval officers. The revolution caught Orlov on the training ship Eagle in the Far East. Together with a small group of midshipmen, Orlov refused to serve with the Whites, returned to Petrograd. He joined the Bolshevik Party, fought well in the Civil War. Later he held major positions in the Navy. Passion for law in his student years affected all of Orlov's activities. He was a remarkable orator. His reviews of the teachings, where usually invited an excessively large number of participants from small to great, were fascinating. Orlov's speeches sparkled with humour, so it was heard. Our submariners honestly slept on the bottom of the sea, while the enemy landing force was approaching. Thanks to the cruiser, it, like a tiger with its ears pinned down, immediately rushed at the enemy, and our Mosquito's torpedo boats ungodly stung the mortally wounded landing force. We, young people, liked it all. In the hall, even sometimes heard applause. But sometimes there was not much instructive in Orlov's passing. He looked very imposing, tall, full. In general, he was an educated and skillful leader. He was greatly assisted by a member of the Revolutionary Military Council GS, Okunev, an experienced and erudite political officer who enjoyed great authority in the fleet. His speeches were always characterized by understanding of the case, specificity, and taught us a lot. On the night of September 12th, 1927, after the end of the fleet exercises, we left for Sochi. On the ship went the commander of the fleet. The weather was marvellous, warm, the sea was completely calm. The moon track seemed especially wide and bright. Gradually disappeared lights of Crimean lighthouses. On the last of them, Atador, I determined the place of the cruiser. We are going by pass, that is not along the coast of Crimea, but by direct course to Sochi. There are no navigational obstacles up to the Caucasian coast. I let the junior navigator II, Kovsh, a joker and jolly man, who had arrived from the last graduating class of the school, rest, and I was not averse to having a rest in the deckhouse on the sofa. The proximity of my superiors made me uneasy. Orlov's loud baritone was coming from the upper bridge. We were approaching the meridian of the Kerch Strait, as suddenly the cruiser shuddered violently, as if it hit a rocky ridge. The commander stopped the machines. But at the map in the navigator's cabin, all the chiefs immediately crowded together. "What's the matter?" I heard Orlov's menacing exclamation. What could I answer? After all, under us the depth of more than 1,000 meters. No matter what happened, but all the chiefs first of all want to immediately see the living culprit of the accident, and then to sort out what's what. Navigator, where is our place? Quickly. I poked a pencil at a point on the map. The cruiser was slowly losing inertia. The rudder was working properly. The machine said the propellers were fine, but they heard a heavy thump there. All sorts of speculations began. Again and again I checked my calculations. It's all right. The cruiser was given the go-ahead again. And half an hour later, a radio operator came up to the bridge and submitted a dispatch to Komflot. Orlov, illuminating a dim flashlight, read it, called the commander. Nikolai Nikolaevich. Everything is clear. In the Crimea strong earthquake, the epicenter in Yalta. And I was still drenched in sweat. It was good that it was dark and no one noticed my excitement. Now they no longer remembered the navigator and did not demand to quickly show our place on the map. The chiefs went from the bridge to their cabins, and the commander and I retired to the deckhouse. Seeing my downcast mood, the commander said, "Let's lie down for an hour, navigator. And don't worry, things happen at sea." So my navigating practice was enriched with acquaintance with earthquake at sea. Despite the delay in the journey, at exactly the appointed time, exactly at 8 o'clock, the cruiser anchored at the Sochi roadstead. We did not manage to visit the shore, because an hour later the watch signalman loudly reported from the bridge the boat, under the flag of the chief of the USSR naval forces, has left the pier. The big assembly was played. The crew lined up in the front. The guard and the band were called to the bay. A boat came to the gangway, and R.A. Muklevich, who first arrived at the Black Sea Fleet after assuming a high position, quickly climbed on deck. The cruiser immediately dropped anchor and set course for Sevastopol. Muklevich said hello, went around the line of sailors and went up to the bridge, where he remained until late at night. The new Nemorsi turned out to be a sociable and inquisitive man. In Sevastopol he visited many ships, talked warmly with the sailors, went to sea, checked the training of the crews. We quickly became convinced that this is a talented, thinking organizer who had his own firm opinion on the ways of building the fleet. The spring of 1928 was remembered by diplomatic troubles. The King of Afghanistan, Amayullah Khan, visited our country. The Soviet government arranged a solemn meeting for him. By that time, the Soviet Union had established good relations with Afghanistan. From our country, the king was to leave on the Turkish yacht Izmir, which was going to Sevastopol accompanied by 2 Turkish gunboats. I was assigned to meet these ships at the border of our territorial waters. For some reason, they did not appoint a pilot, so I performed his functions. However, the entrance to the northern bay of Sevastopol was not difficult. We had to follow the same course right along the Inkerman lighthouses. The weather was fresh, and already on the way to the ships my snow-white suit, I was dressed according to form no. One suffered from splashes. I got even wetter when I caught a storm trap, a thin rope ladder, and used it to climb up the high side of an ocean-going yacht. Having ascended to the deck, on behalf of the fleet commander I congratulated the commander of the detachment on his arrival and pointed out on the map the place allocated for the parking of the ships. The Turkish officer, having seen my commander's patches, apologized for making me go up the storm trap, explaining his mistake by the fact that they were expecting a pilot and not a representative of the fleet commander. The royal couple, who had arrived in Sevastopol by that time, were accommodated on the yacht. I was assigned the role of liaison officer to Queen Soraya. My duties were not difficult, but rather tedious. I arrived at the yacht at the raising of the flag. The Queen, of course, was still asleep. I had to loiter on deck. At 10 o'clock, the Queen would invite me to breakfast. I was served a large shot of brandy and 2 galettes. I suppose it was assumed I'd already eaten breakfast somewhere. All I could do was look back longingly at the cruiser's wardroom. All day the Queen sat on deck in a chaise longue, looked through binoculars at the city and made me tell about all the monuments and ancient buildings that caught her eye. The Queen spoke French very well, I spoke it very badly, but we still understood each other, though she sometimes laughed heartily at my pronunciation. She was a beautiful, very graceful and clever woman, but it was, however, a heavy burden to stay with her all the time. On the 20th of May, the yacht Izmir left Sevastopol under the thunder of gun salute. Our pilots, who accompanied the yacht as an honorary escort, very spectacularly dropped 2 large bouquets of fresh flowers on the stern, where Amayullah Khan and his entourage were. We admired for a long time afterwards good pilots. They know how to bomb ships. Following the Izmir in Turkey were to go to Chervona Ukraina and 3 of our destroyers. In preparation for the march to Istanbul, an unexpected problem arose. Some big Navy chiefs were going to go with us. It seemed inconvenient that on one cruiser will suddenly be so many high officials. It was decided all, except for the fleet commander and a few other officials, to change insignia, so some of the flagships were suddenly much lower in rank. Since it was assumed that many of us in Istanbul will be invited to various receptions, we were announced how the Turkish ranks sounded, corresponding to ours. I was thus equated with a Turkish yüzbaşı. The demoted chiefs looked at their new patches with embarrassment, but it turned out that even those patches which remained on our sleeves surprised the Turks. During a banquet on the old Turkish cruiser Hamidiye, I found myself sitting next to an elderly Istanbul official. Though with great difficulty, we found a common language with him. My interlocutor looked at the gold stripes of Orlov and Okunev, who were sitting not far from us. "Tell me, please, Mr. Yüzbaşı, in what ranks are they?" I explained that, Mr. Orlov was an admiral and Mr. Okunev was a vice-admiral. The old man thought for a moment, and then pointed to the chief of staff of the fleet. "And he, then, is a rear admiral?" "Yes." "I see you are rich people. We have only one admiral in the fleet, and that one is retired, and while the fleet is commanded by a captain of the first rank, this one," and he pointed to a representative man. On May 28th we entered the Bosphorus, the most beautiful strait between high mountains. The strait is winding, there is a very strong current at the turns, the cruiser was trying to trot sideways, but Nesvitsky managed the ship perfectly. And more than once I had to run from the compass on the bridge to the navigator's cabin, to the chart. Our ships anchored at the roadstead of Istanbul, opposite the former Sultan's palace Dolmabahce, with a grandiose dome and many towers. Numerous visits of chiefs of all ranks began. The representative of the People's Commissariat on the cruiser determined how many salutes should be given to this or that guest. All day long the cannonade rattled over the roadstead. Poor junior artilleryman Petya, soft and good-natured, was completely knocked off his feet. Of course, it was not without the fact that some of them were overshot and some were undershot, and they had to finish shooting the next day with flag hoisting. And there was a case when they shot for nothing, because the white yacht that appeared in the strait was not the one they were waiting for. Before my eyes, a tall gentleman in a ceremonial coat and cylinder came off the cruiser. He, too, was entitled to something salutary. As soon as the boat left the gangway, Petya hastened to command salute. The cannon boomed, and the boat was still so close that the air wave knocked down and blew the guest's cylinder into the water. The gentleman was at first taken aback, but then smiled and waved at us. There were many receptions and meetings in Istanbul. The atmosphere at them was friendly and the attitude towards us was most attentive. Then the cruiser and destroyers passed into the Gulf of Izmir in the Aegean Sea and anchored among small green islets, not far from the main base of the Turkish Navy. Here already stood the yacht Izmir and several ships under different flags. It was announced that there would be friendly rowing races. I was again ordered to stay with Queen Soraya and give her explanations on the course of the races. Amanullah Khan, his wife and the whole retinue were interested in where the Russian dinghies were standing. During the race they noisily cheered for our rowers and warmly applauded when the Soviet dinghies were the first to cross the finish line. Our sailors conducted the race brilliantly. Even the silent and dry-eyed Nesvitsky himself met the boats returning from the races at the gangway and kept repeating, "Well done. Thank you." Before sailing we returned to Istanbul. Turkish naval officers organised us a farewell, as they put it, on the level of ships' cabins. From the cruiser group of command staff, led by senior mate Lenin. From the destroyers were mostly young people with their exos. The evening with a pop concert was fun and relaxed. Many speeches were characterized by the boldness of political judgments. I remember well how one of the Turkish sailors said, "Russians, you are good, you do not listen to anyone, neither Germans nor English, you do everything for yourselves. You will show yourselves yet, I believe in it." And from other statements it was clear that neither Weimar Germany nor the British at that time had no special love for the young Turkish officers. We returned from the farewell dinner rather late. With difficulty we drove the hosts away, for not all were able to name their ship. At last we approached our cruiser and saw that it stood without lights. Nor are the cabin portholes lighted. What's the matter? And when we came to the gangway, water jets fell on our heads. The cheerful mood of all those who were sitting in the boat disappeared at once. Exo Olenin asks, "Listen, Pantilaev, what does it mean? Did the commander announce a fire alarm?" He picked a bad time. I kept silent, but Junior Navigator Kovsh immediately objected. "No, Comrade Exo, he won't dare to do it without you." We went up to the deck. Fire hoses were deployed all around, redcoats running around with fire extinguishers. Turns out it's not a drill, but a real fire in one of the boiler rooms. Now it is already defeated. Disposition and energy of the senior watch commander NG, Kuznetsov, who remained for the XO, and boiler engineer mechanic NL. Lobanovsky had an impact. Neither on the shore nor on the Turkish ships standing in the roadstead noticed anything. With the dawn we painted the burnt chimney, and the last traces of the night incident disappeared forever. At the appointed time our detachment dropped anchor. The ships took their places in the escort of the yacht Izmir. We escorted her to Batumi. There the last salute was sounded to Emanuel Khan, who went ashore for further dry passage to Afghanistan. We all breathed a sigh of relief. The parade marches had already bored us with noise and colourfulness. Again began combat training, revived the wardroom, the centre of the spiritual life of the ship, where the commanders gather in a free minute to relax in a friendly circle, to exchange views. I do not remember a more friendly and cheerful wardroom than on the Chervona Ukraina. It helped a lot to unite the crew of the cruiser. Here I made a lot of new friends. I still have good ties with many of them. In particular, participating in the amateur art performances of the cruiser, I became friends with the Chief Petty Officer of Turbine Operators Evgeny Zhukov and Political Officer Nikolay Zubkov. We still meet now. Zhukov became a Vice Admiral, and Zubkov became a Captain of the first rank, an excellent political officer. And almost all my co-workers of those years grew up, matured, became very valuable people for the fleet. In 1928, when the cruiser was on winter repair, I was transferred to the fleet headquarters. Staff work expands the outlook of the commander. It is a kind of academy, but without taking time off from production. As part of the marching staff of the fleet commander, I have been on large exercises, visited many ships, checking the organization of service and crew training, familiarized with the life of commercial ports. All this enriches the experience of a naval officer. Once after big maneuvers I was called by the commissar of the staff, an old Baltic sailor Akimov, who treated us, young people, very warmly. "Listen, Panteleit, you should study. What do you think about it?" In those years, candidates for the academy were selected by the Navy Revolutionary Military Council. It was strict, it was responsible for them before Moscow. I, of course, said that I would consider it a great honor and try to justify the trust. So it was decided to send you to the academy. Don't embarrass us Black Sea sailors. Together, with Baltic Tulumbasov, we were the first to pass the exams and were accepted. I was convinced by personal experience it's never too late to study. The very process of learning makes a person younger. In those years, students of the Naval Academy wore a gold-embroidered anchor on the left sleeve of their tunic. It turned out something like a cadet of the highest rank. The academy did not provide dormitory for everyone. It was considered so if you want to study, you will find a roof yourself. The working day began at 8:45 a.m. and ended at 3:45 p.m., and we went home, taking the necessary textbooks. Most of them were not secret. In short, we were allowed to study anywhere, not excluding, of course, the academy classrooms. Party meetings, as well as meetings of the academic council, were held only after classes. Holding meetings during office hours was out of the question. K.I. Dushanov, being the head of the academy, did a good deed. The students got 1 day a week free from lectures. On this day, the students practiced independently in reading rooms, in any study room, or even at home. Everyone was grateful to Dushanov, an old Baltic sailor, an intelligent, original person. We used this Dushanov's day to the fullest for reading additional literature, especially on the history of naval art. Teachers on this day were also preparing for lectures or were engaged in scientific work, but soon there were ardent opponents of this allegedly overly democratic method. The reason for this was two cases. Once someone saw a listener of our class in line for meat, and another time at noon spotted overcoat with an anchor on the sleeve at an afternoon movie show. A boom went up, and the Dushanov days were cancelled. 18 years later, I had the opportunity to become the head of the academy myself. And the first thing I started with was the introduction of self-training days. I deeply believe in their necessity. The academy should differ from the school in teaching methods and organization of the educational process. The basis of everything is independent work, while providing students with educational material. Introductory lectures should be given, and then consultations should be held, and lectures on minor issues are not necessary at all. They only take time away from teachers and students. But more time should be allocated for essays and two-sided games. After all, we are dealing with senior officers with the second stage of their higher education. When I studied at the academy was taught by remarkable scientists who deserved world fame. I mean A.N. Krylov V.A., Umkovsky N.A., Sekulari P.F., Papkovich I.P., Shashov A.I., Berg and many others. All the teachers presented their subject brilliantly. I can't recall a single case when a lecturer from the department monotonously read from what was written. We could not even imagine such a thing. We had another thing when, for example, V.A. Belli, who read operational art, finished his last sentence. The audience erupted in rapturous applause, so speech for Belli was deep, bright and colourful. The general tactics was read by S.P. Stavitsky. I have never met in my life a man more collected and more economical in presenting his thoughts. From the printed lecture of S.P. Stavitsky, it was impossible to cross out a single word or preposition, as it is impossible to cross out a single digit from the multiplication table. Just for fun we tried to do it. Nothing worked, the meaning was distorted at once. This is how S.P. Stavitsky was in life. A man of action. He did not like and could not talk for nothing. We, pupils of V.E., Igoriev and E.E. Shvedi, always remember them and are grateful for the fact that they introduced us, first of all, to the methodology of scientific work. They repeatedly told us that it is not necessary to discover America, it is a waste of time. They taught us to understand what is the scientific apparatus for work and how to use it. Thus, at lectures in the office on naval geography EEE, Shvedi always not only demonstrated beautiful relief maps, but also showed us a lot of different Russian and foreign reference books. First, we should study what is already known to science, what has already been discovered by people in this field, he instructed, and only then try to say your word. All students were attached to the departments to participate in research work, a wonderful method of introduction to science. Many of us wrote our first scientific papers in these circles at the departments. We cannot forget AI. Voznesensky, later a major political figure of our state, he taught us political economy. But how he taught, his clear formulations, logically brief, sometimes sharp, but always convincing generalizations are still in my memory. He gave us scanty but fair grades, and admittedly we were afraid of Voznesensky. In no time you could earn an F, and after 2 or 3 unsatisfactory grades the listener was threatened with a bleak return to the Navy. It is impossible to count all the wonderful teachers to whom we are still grateful for their hard but honourable work. However, about the academy of those years remained not only pleasant memories, but also some feeling of annoyance. We should not keep silent about it in order not to repeat mistakes. Some people tried to artificially introduce into the life of the academy orders not peculiar to the educational institution. Workers at the enterprises began to put forward counter-plans. Immediately, we also found advocates of early graduation. Reduced programs were hastily developed. Supposedly outdated teaching material was withdrawn. Time was wasted on unnecessary disputes. There was a lot of noise, but in the end only harm to the cause. We sometimes forgot what is good at the factory is not always suitable for an educational institution. At that time in the industry successfully introduced a brigade method of labour. The role of the foreman was rising. Our hut heads insisted on introducing the brigade method in the academy. Students were divided into groups of 3 to 4 people headed by a brigadier. The brigade worked together, but only the brigadier answered the teacher's questions in class. The grade he received was the grade of the whole brigade. I think it is clear what this led to. Only the brigadiers studied and prepared for the answers, and the rest of the class studied poorly. semester grades were also practiced, which were issued by the teacher together with the secretary of the party cell. Luckily, all of these ideas were of a campaign nature and quickly came to their logical end. Perhaps the most annoying of all were the excesses in physical training. For some reason the top began to take a special interest in it, and the pressure began on all counts, and the academy had neither a gym nor a swimming pool. Even the yard was not good. They rented premises on the side at hours convenient to the directorates of sports facilities. It used to take an hour to get to the academy on a frosty day in a cold, packed streetcar and, dropping your briefcase, run a few blocks to the swimming pool. The rooms cooled down overnight. Gritting your teeth, you throw off your clothes, grab a wooden rifle, and with it jump off the diving board into the water. While you are practicing the jump, your head gets foggy, and then you have to swim the distance several times. They came to the classes as wasted as crayfish, and after that you could answer the questions to the same strict Vosnensky. It happened like this: tomorrow the exam on tactics, and today after classes get on skis and in bitter frost, in a blizzard go around Vasilievsky Island on the Neva River and finish at the Tochkov Bridge. How many times I and my buddies Andrei Kristovsky and Ivan Palilov skied this distance in the evening. We were so tired that afterwards we fell asleep over a book. I have loved sports since childhood. I became a master of sports, and maybe that's why I especially resent the frivolous attitude to this great cause. Sports should add strength, improve health, not the other way around. Actually, we loved sports, were engaged in it with passion, very dear to the sports honour of the academy. I wore the badge ready for labour and defence with no less pride than the combat awards. Characteristic for our life of those years were unceasing discussions about what kind of fleet we need. Most of the young teachers and students continued to advocate for the full development of the submarine fleet. It took time for everyone to be convinced that it is impossible to have a fleet consisting of only submarines, as it is wrong to focus only on large surface ships. The country needs a balanced, combined fleet with all the necessary classes of ships in the appropriate proportion. At the same time, of course, the real capabilities of the country's economy and defence tasks should be taken into account. This is what our government decided. 3 years of study at the academy flew by surprisingly fast. In the spring of 1933, in the Kremlin was solemnly celebrated our graduation. I graduated from the academy with honours. I was given the 10th service category, which was indicated by one wide gold patch on my sleeve. After the voyage on the Vorovsky, we returned to the courses again. I graduated in the spring of 1925. I was assigned to the Black Sea. Here's the Crimea. I don't leave the window of the carriage. On the southern land is already lush green. Almond blossoms. The train dives into a tunnel. There are several of them here. Daylight flashes for a moment, and then darkness again. Finally, the sun struck my eyes so brightly that I involuntarily squeezed my eyes shut. The South Bay is blue below. I looked at the ships. Which of them will I serve on? On the platform we were surrounded by boys offering us a room. My wife liked the little boy who was so quick. Come on, take me to your place. We didn't have to go very far. On Sailor Koshka Street at the foot of Malakoff Barrow, our guide knocked on the gate. In the yard stood a small house drowning in greenery. A grey-haired man in a calfskin jacket met us. He introduced himself Ivan Afanasievsky, an old resident of these places, a former Black Sea sailor. We liked the house and its owner, and we settled here, on the Korabelnaya side. Leaving my wife to unpack my suitcases, I hurried to the fleet headquarters. A small streetcar, the pride of Sevastopol residents, who opened streetcar traffic 9 years earlier than in St. Petersburg, took me to the centre of the city. The commanders I met told me that the headquarters, the Revolutionary Military Council, and the political administration of the fleet were housed on the Krasny Sailor, which stood at the Minia Wharf. I expected to see a large ship, but it turned out to be an old-wheeled steamer of only about 100 tons displacement. Afterwards I learned that it was built in England back in 1866. It was bought by the Russian government and immediately ended up in Sevastopol, and became the yacht of the chief commander of the fleet and ports of the Black Sea. As a yacht of the High Chief, the steamship, maybe, was good, but as a staff ship it was not suitable. It was terribly cramped. The cabin of the chief of the fleet personnel department was tiny. Its door was wide open. The owner of the cabin sat at a small table. On the bunk there was no other furniture sat a visitor, some big commander with a wide patch on his sleeve. The rest of the bunk was occupied by stacks of folders. They were arguing heatedly, and no one paid any attention to my cautious knocking. Willy-nilly I had to witness the conversation. The visitor asked to give him 4 navigators for submarines, and the head of the personnel department assured me that he could give only 2. Finally, both of them turned to me and almost in one voice asked me what I needed. "You need a navigator on a submarine. You can have me." The head of the personnel department looked at my papers, wrinkled his nose. "If you wanted to be a submariner, you should have graduated from the submarine class. And now you'll go to the submarine." Nonsense. A visitor intervened. "He's a navigator, that's the main thing, and we'll teach him underwater affairs. Don't argue, Collier, write a prescription, because the man himself asks for a submarine, and it doesn't happen that often." The head of the personnel department waved his hand and made a resolution. "Well, now let's get acquainted," said the visitor, and extended his palm to me. "Golovachov, head of a separate division of submarines of the Black Sea Fleet." In a few minutes he and I were already walking along the bay on a slow-moving Katerishka. On the way Golovachov asked me a lot of questions, as if evaluating the new acquisition. At that time it was not customary to address the superiors about the apartment, and they did not stutter about it. But nevertheless, at the gangway of the mother ship the chief asked, "By the way, where have you settled down?" I answered, which was followed by a calm nod. The submarine base Berezan is an old transport from the First World War. Fleeing from Sevastopol, the Whites blew up the ship's machinery and looted the equipment. So dead it stood in the South Bay, not far from the station. Charging station, battery workshop and other facilities necessary for submarines were just beginning to be built. For the time being 5 submarines stood orphaned at the floating piers and were, as it is called, on self-service. The cabins on the Berezan were small, uncomfortable and completely unequipped. I settled down with navigator E.E. Pivovarov, my old comrade in service and study. At first it was dreary. We, as a distant dream, remembered our luxurious cabins on the battleship Marat and on the submarine Kvinets. The wardroom, where the entire command staff of the division dined, was also dark and shabby. However, we did not complain about it. The other thing was important: we had a friendly crew. The wardroom was always noisy and cheerful. In such an environment, any everyday inconveniences seemed to be nothing. They accepted us, young navigators, very friendly. In a couple of days it seemed to me that I had been serving in the division for a long time. Of course it largely depended on Nartiv Golovachov and Commissar Golubovsky. Both of them were old submariners. Unlike Golovachev, a noisy and harsh man, Golubovsky was soft-spoken, listened to us more than he spoke. Sensitive, attentive, he constantly cared about people. I was appointed navigator on the submarine Politruk, the only large boat of the Tight Bars. These boats were built back in the Tsarist times according to the project of the talented Russian shipbuilding engineer I.G. Bubnov. In the First World War they fought well. During the years of intervention, several boats of this type were taken away by the Whites to Bizerte, the rest were blown up, sunk or brought into complete disrepair. The only one left was Nerpa. After a thorough repair she was given a new name and included in the Black Sea Fleet. We served on it now. The surface displacement of the boat is about 600 tons. She did not shine with speeds 6 to 8 knots in the surface position, and underwater you can hardly squeeze out 5 knots. And even then, for a very short period of time, the batteries quickly sat down. Our ship looked like a huge steel cigar, stuffed with mechanisms and without a single watertight bulkhead. At the slightest damage to the hull, water could flood the entire boat. The designers strove to reduce the weight of the ship at any cost, sacrificing even its survivability. Armament consisted of 4 torpedo tubes, 2 each in the bow and stern, working depth of immersion up to 50 meters. I remember, In the first campaign I noticed that the commander does not take his eyes off the depth gauge, and, when the arrow approaches the number 40, loudly commands boatsmen, more accurately keep the depth, do not go further than 40 meters. The old submariner bosun VI, Korneev kept watch on the depth rudders. He, smiling slyly, reported yes, more accurately hold, depth of 35 meters. The other 4 boats were of the AG type. They were already assembled in Soviet factories, although according to the design of the American engineer Holland. They were half the size of ours, but in all other respects they were superior. They had watertight bulkheads, longer stroke and 4 torpedo tubes in the bow. But let me return to the very beginning of my submarine service. Vladimir Petrovich Rakhmin, the commander of the Politruk, having gotten acquainted with me, called the senior assistant. "Here is a navigator for you," he told him. "Take him under your tutelage. Let him study the ship, and in 2 weeks I will check it myself." Yes, it will be done. Kirill Osipovich Osipov, a man of medium height with a good formation, answered clearly. "I have already noted to myself that on the ship he is respected, and even a little afraid of him, although he is restrained and gives orders without raising his voice." From morning till evening I climbed on the boat accompanied by the bosun or one of the petty officers, made notes in a thick notebook, in the evenings studied the drawings. The XO looked through my notebook daily and probably reported to the commander. Commissar Timofeev was also interested in how my studies were going and encouraged me. "Do not be embarrassed. At first you probably have a muddle in your head. But time will pass and everything will settle down." And I studied even more persistently. In 2 weeks the commander went with me all over the boat, checked my knowledge and, it seems, was satisfied. I began to like VP Rakhmin more and more, and it seemed that he was the best of all boat commanders in the division. Always neatly dressed, a little stern, frowning at the sight, Vladimir Petrovich was strict, sometimes even harsh, but always fair and, what is very important, never infringed on the dignity of his subordinates. Our separate division of submarines was then the only solid combat unit of the fleet. After all, except for him in the line, were only destroyer-type Novik, just restored and called Nezamozhnik, the old cruiser Komintern. So called now the famous Ochakov, on which Lieutenant Schmidt raised the red flag in 1905, a few no less old gunboats, minesweepers and a division of torpedo and patrol boats. Naval aviation was just beginning to emerge. Old batteries of coastal defense were being restored. This was the beginning of the Soviet Black Sea Fleet. And all these ancient old men were very useful to us, on them grew, brought up and trained the personnel of the future mighty fleet. With joy we learned that the Soviet government decided to build new submarines according to the designs of Soviet designers, and light cruisers and destroyers already on the slipway to arm with modern artillery. All these decisions very soon began to be implemented, and the northern bay of Sevastopol ceased to serve only one old man Komintern. Combat training of submarines in those days had a number of features. Now it will seem very primitive, and I tell about it with the sole purpose of showing the reader how far we have stepped forward. It was the initial stage of our growth. It is far behind us, but it was from it that the victorious course of our fleet into the vastness of the world ocean began. We went to sea, to special training grounds, almost every day, except Saturday, Sunday and Monday. We always returned to the base by dinner time, by 18 o'clock. Command staff and super-enlisted men who were not on duty were discharged to shore every day. On Sunday it was allowed not to report for duty at all, except for those on duty. This day was considered as a day of rest for all. Red Fleet sailors went ashore on Wednesday, Saturday and Sunday. Training grounds were located in the coastal strip, almost near Sevastopol, which allowed to shorten transitions in the surface position. In addition, on the approach to the main base and other Black Sea ports there were still mine hazards from the First World War and especially the recent years of the Civil War. Minefields were trawled, but there were not enough minesweepers. Besides, trawling at sea was not only dangerous but also long. More than once we went around a minefield, and the commander turned to me with a threatening warning. "Navigator, be attentive. Once we went beyond the edge of the fairway and stern rudders undercut a mine. We surfaced with it together. Fortunately, everything ended safely. After such reminders, a chill ran down my spine. I hurried to the bridge to take bearing to the lighthouses and to determine my position more precisely. In the first half of the summer, the boats practiced single tasks, mainly emergency diving, so that in case of detection of the enemy quickly go to depth. But no matter how hard we tried, but in less than 3 or 4 minutes the emergency dive could not be accomplished. And it was still considered to be a good thing. The nearest to the base training ground, opposite the villages of Kutcher and Belbek, was divided into zones A and B. We were tired of daily visits to these baths, and the Red Fleet men the eternal wit and jokers put together a song that ended with the refrain, "If you want to die of boredom, go, comrade, to Arizona and Buki." In the second half of the summer began tactical training of the entire fleet. Ships gathered in the Tendrovsky Bay. Once came there and wheeled old man Red Sailor with the entire staff and Reva Insovit of the fleet. The fleet practiced the reflection of night attacks of torpedo boats and other tasks. Submariners, these training camps did not give much, as we could not dive in the bay because of the shallow depths. Apparently, our presence at the training camp was necessary to create more scale. After the fleet gathering, there were tactical exercises. The main task was of a defensive nature. The fleet, together with coastal batteries, must prevent the landing of paratroopers in the area of Sevastopol or Odessa. For this purpose, submarines were sent to the sea, to the positions planned by the headquarters, where we expected the appearance of the enemy. If sometimes we were lucky and the enemy, as they call it, came across us, we went out to attack, marking the torpedo salvo firing air. We had no communication with the intelligence, and while waiting for the target we often rode in the allotted square for 24 hours. Torpedoes in the fleet were few. They were saved, so fired rarely and necessarily at shallow depths. The thing is that torpedoes often sank. In such cases, a diving boat rushed to the scene. Divers searched the bottom and did not always find the torpedo. The loss of a torpedo was considered a big emergency, and the boat commander had a lot of trouble on this occasion. Although we were called submariners, we did not swim underwater much. We were saving power for the attack. We went to the position in a surface position, and our underwater swimming lasted no more than an hour. When the ship was moving underwater, the batteries emitted a lot of gases, the pressure in the boat increased greatly, it became difficult to breathe, and we had to surface and ventilate the rooms. It was believed that torpedoes could be fired from a distance of only 4 or 5 cable meters. If the distance was more than that, the attack was considered bad. At a distance of 10 cable meters, the probability of hitting the target was considered close to 0. Only one torpedo was to be fired. There was no question of any joint action of the submarines at that time, because there were no devices for communication between the boats in the underwater position. Many commanders were fond of searching for areas with liquid ground, with different density layers of water, between which the boat could stay at the same level for a long time without moving. In this way, electricity was saved. At that time, this idea had some tactical sense, and it was especially engaged in Vladimir Surin, commander of the submarine Kommuna, a man educated, energetic, busy searching for new, more effective forms of combat use of our ships. All 5 submarine commanders of the division were representatives of the best part of the intelligentsia of those years. Educated, experienced submariners, they enjoyed well-deserved authority among their subordinates. And it is no coincidence that later these comrades took leading positions in the Navy. Thus V.S. Surin became an inspector of the submarine fleet. N.M. Gornyakovsky, commander of the submarine Marxist after the war, commanded a large submarine training unit of the Pacific Fleet, VP. Rachmin for a long time was chief of staff of the brigade of new large boats in the Baltic. Major positions were subsequently held by BM. Voroshilin and GX. Schroeder. They were brave, searching people. Once I was on watch on a floating base. Our boat these days stood on the current repair, the rest were at sea. And suddenly I noticed almost at the side of the floating base water boiled, a hissing sound was heard, as if an air pipe burst, and then a periscope grew out of the water. A moment later, the submarine commoner appeared on the surface. She surfaced at the boom, in the place of her usual anchorage. The hatches opened, and the Red Fleet men jumped to the boom and secured the mooring ends. Vladimir Surin, the smiling commander of the boat, was already standing on the bridge. He waved his hand at me and cheerfully announced. The breakthrough into the enemy base was successful. Everything happened so quickly and unexpectedly that the signallers on watch, who were mainly watching the entrance to the bay, did not notice anything. Of course, both me and the signallers got a big beating from Commander Golovachov. During this and the following days at lunch and dinner in the wardroom, there was only talk about Surin's manoeuvre and how the whole watch on Berezin slept through it. Our commander VP, Rakhmin, was mysteriously silent. It seems that he had something on his mind too. And so it turned out. When we were going to the sea, the commander, having surprised the boat, immediately submerged, and we, occasionally raising the periscope a little, passed the whole southern and northern bays and surfaced in the sea. The commander, without taking his eyes off the periscope, was glad that boats and skiffs were passing close by and nobody noticed us. That year there were no booms at the entrance to the main base, as well as there was no brig service, and from the shore observation post it was very difficult to notice the periscope. However, soon these underwater tricks were banned. Today's submariners will surely be surprised not only by our then combat training, but also by many details of everyday life of sailors. On each ship, one of the young specialists was a part-time auditor in charge of finances and economic affairs. For some reason, everywhere this happiness fell to the navigator. He was assisted by an artisan from among the most turn-around Red Fleet men. Depending on the number of crew members, money for food was released. They were kept in my small portable safe. Taking into account the wishes of the crew, and on the basis of our financial possibilities, the artilleman and I prepared the menu the night before. And in the morning, at a little light, he and one of the Red Fleet men went to the market, bought everything that was required for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and took receipts from the merchants. The products delivered to the ship were accounted for and then sent to the galley of the floating base. Since we did not receive rations, each crew ate according to their own taste and reason, within the money limit. The inspectors competed to see who could feed their crew the best and tastiest. We actually ate hearty meals. Of course, I did not immediately become an experienced economic manager at first. Every month I had to cover the shortfall from my own salary. It happened on other boats too. In the fall, after tactical exercises, the entire fleet under the flag of the commander made a tour of the ports of the Crimea and mainly the Caucasus up to and including Batumi. At the same time, tactical exercises were conducted with the landing of paratroopers, artillery firing, etc. Submarines left the port usually before other ships, took the designated positions, and when the cruiser Comintern appeared, they made training attacks on it without firing torpedoes. Visiting the ports usually turned into a kind of holiday. The population, especially young people, warmly welcomed us. Local authorities arranged in theatres, clubs and parks meetings with sailors. In the Navy, these campaigns were nicknamed Tangerine. It was explained by the fact that in the fall the fruit was ripe in the Caucasus, and the ships received from the local authorities, as a gift, whole boxes of apples and tangerines. Everyone who had money tried to take home at least some fruit. Sailors were eager to buy tiny date palms in pots. This souvenir was in great demand at that time. But where to store the purchases? Everything was easier for our friends from surface ships. But what is it like for us, submariners, because we have neither cabins nor closets? Before leaving Batumi, it became known that our whole division was going to Poti by surface to practice joint navigation. The commander, having announced it, strictly warned. Don't take anything extra with you. A lot of people got discouraged. Me too. I was lucky to buy a damn palm tree and tangerines. We had a petty officer Sapiro, an excellent radio operator, but an unbearable joker. Noticing my concern, he smiled slyly. Navigator, where shall we put our presents? I didn't like his swagger, and I answered angrily. Overboard. Did you hear what the commander said? Nothing. We'll wait to throw them overboard. After a few minutes he came to me again. "Take your purchases and follow me." We went forward. At the open lids of the torpedo apparatuses, the chief torpedo officer and the bosun were bustling about. They were putting bags, bundles, and unfortunate palm trees into the empty tubes of the apparatuses. They put my packages there too. The lids of the apparatuses closed. Sapiro was smiling. "How was it? Great idea." I was embarrassed by all this machination, but calmed by the thought that in the torpedo apparatuses, not only my purchases, our mechanic P.I., Pechenik, Minor A.T., Zaistrovsev, and many others used the service of torpedoists. At dawn the division went to sea, made a number of evolutions on the signals of the commander. After visiting the beautiful evergreen Batumi, everyone's mood cheerful and cheerful. The weather was excellent, there was not a cloud in the sky, the sea was quiet. Flags flashed on the flagship boat. We read a semaphore addressed to us, "Commander, take position 5 miles west of the Poti lighthouse. Attack the enemy. After the attack, follow Poti." Commander. Everyone on the bridge looked at each other unhappily. After a while the diesels stalled, and the commanding officer's imperious voice rang through the boat. "Prepare for diving. We will shoot air from the bow torpedo apparatuses." Minor cautiously suggested to the commander for practice to shoot aft, but the commander as a knife cut off. First the bow. Sapiro could not find a place. In the end he could not stand it, called aside Commissar Timofeev and whispered in his ear, "You can't shoot with the noses." "Why?" The commissar was surprised. "Let's see." He went down and ordered to open the torpedo lids. Under the friendly laughter of sailors, Sapiro began to pull out the contents of the tubes. The commander came in. He was boiling, swearing. With difficulty Timofeev persuaded him not to throw anything overboard, but we got a lot of trouble. Our commander was outraged not by the fact of acquiring souvenirs, but by the attitude to combat weapons. It is necessary. Instead of torpedoes, they stuffed all sorts of junk into the vehicles. We returned to the base on a wonderful fall day. There was not the slightest ripple on the sea, and the sun was burning mercilessly. Even in a light working tunic, it was unbearably hot. Suddenly we saw that on our right on the boat, was rushing fast, leaving a foaming trail on the surface, not a periscope, not a torpedo. We realized that neither of them could be. Still, everyone on the bridge was numb. Only when we came closer we saw that they were dolphins. They were moving swiftly, and their fins really looked like periscopes from afar. I remembered this incident much later, already during the war. In the first days of the war, our signallers became truly periscopomaniacal. They were ready to take any splash on the water as a periscope of an enemy submarine. We were not immediately cured of this disease. It was believed that it was better to play the alarm once more than to miss a real periscope. Many problems worried us young submariners at that time, and in particular, not infrequent explosions of batteries. Imperfect instruments sometimes did not always detect dangerous accumulation of hydrogen in the battery pits. A spark was enough. Explosions were accompanied by fires, sometimes with loss of life, but we kept sailing, gradually eradicating the causes of accidents. But now the warm months were over and the sea was empty. Ships hid in the bays. The fleet began ship repairs and a period of mass vacations. No one could go to sea. The fleet in the wintertime became inoperable. For some reason at that time, no one thought about the fact that we might have to fight in winter. That war does not recognize seasons. What was the reason for this? Perhaps adherence to the old, habitual for centuries the Navy did not sail in winter. Today, our ships, submarine and surface, go to the seas and oceans in summer and in the cold of winter. This has already become the order of the day. Back then, at the dawn of our naval youth, we turned into landmen in winter. In order not to return to the service on submarines, I will go a little ahead. I had a chance to sail on submarines even afterward. The submarine fleet of our country was growing before my eyes. When I, being a student of the academy, came to the Black Sea for training, There was no longer a division, but 2 brigades of submarines. New, domestically built, they were perfect for that time and were divided mainly into 3 groups: small little ones, medium pikes, large Decembrists and underwater minesweepers of Leninets type. We also had our own floating bases. It was already a real underwater force. They showed themselves brilliantly during the Great Patriotic War. I interned as Chief of Staff of the brigade. In those years, a trainee at the academy had to earn an excellent certification, which affected the entire future service. Knowing this, we were loaded to the hilt. I conducted political classes with Red Fleets, made reports on military issues at commanders' classes, edited the Wall newspaper, headed the sailing club, and all this, of course, over and above the responsible duties of the Chief of Staff. Submarines in the brigade was a lot. They were distributed over 5 divisions. Not only the brigade commander G.V. Vasiliev, but also the commander of the fleet IK, Kozhanov, who was interested in the work of students of the academy, were looking at me. Later I learned that I was intended to leave after the academy as Chief of Staff in the same brigade. In the end, it turned out so. The brigade was expanding its economy. It became known that a coastal base was being built for us. One thing was surprising: the only freezing port on the Black Sea was chosen for it. Submariners sounded the alarm, even appealed to the Central Committee of the party. But while the issue was being resolved, the base was being built. Everything was sorted out only when the work was coming to an end. Everything had to be replayed. The base was handed over to naval pilots, and the submarines returned to Sevastopol. Combat training was still strictly according to the plan, but very carefully. The boats were submerged only in specially designated shallow places, all at the same ranges Arizona and Buki. Especially meticulously practiced actions on emergency diving, trim laying on the ground. Brigade Commander Grigory Vasilievich Vasiliev, an experienced submariner who sailed on boats back in the Tsarist times, was demanding and tireless. His energy was overflowing, and perhaps that was why he could get noisy, but as a kind man, he quickly withdrew. His valuable quality was care for his subordinates and willingness to always help in trouble to any fighter and commander. Everyone knew it and went to him with their own affairs. But with his superiors, Grigory Vasilievich could not talk, was excessively shy. As a disciplined man, he listened silently to not always fair comments, never objected, but then upset and bitterly worried. One day, without warning, the fleet commander IK, Kozhanov, came to us. Without much reason, he began to resent the slow development of the little ones. The division commander A.V., Krestovsky, and I were present. We saw how our commander blushed and did not even try to justify himself. Krestovsky and I looked at each other, not knowing how to help his superior. The commander noticed it. You, Chief of Staff and Division Commander, also guilty. Do not help the commander. There was a pause. Why are you silent, is not it? Asked the commander. And then spoke Andrei Krestovsky. No, not so, Comrade Commander. The combat training plan is drawn up precisely according to the calculation of time for each task, as required by the instructions. You personally approved this plan, and it is strictly followed. The commander looked at the commander surprised. He hesitated, and then said, In that case, you, Comrade Vasiliev, check everything again. Perhaps, and I made a mistake. It happens to everyone. And you, Comrade Krestovsky, I thank you for your courage and ability to defend your opinion. He extended his hand to each of us and left. Grigory Vasilievich was ready to kiss Krestovsky. It was a wonderful, intelligent commander. He died in the Patriotic War, performing a combat mission. Much help to Vasiliev was provided by the head of the political department of the brigade, Akonopelkin. I have already said that the brigade commander was too hot. There were times when he would make a fuss he couldn't stop it. Then someone would rush to Konopelkin. Andrei Mikhailovich, come to the brigade commander, he is very stormy. Konopelkin hastened to the rescue of someone in trouble, and the storm subsided. I would like to say at least a few words about Ivan Kuzmich Kozhanov. This is a legendary personality. While still studying in midshipman classes, he joined the Communist Party. He took an active part in the revolution, and in the 18th voluntarily went to the Eastern Front. He was 21 years old at the time. And even at that time he showed himself a talented commander. Sailor detachments led by him won victories over the superior forces of the White Guards and interventionists. The fame of Ivan Kozhanov flew all over the Volga region. In the 20th year he commanded a naval expeditionary division that defeated the White Landing in the Azov region. After the Civil War, when he was only 24 years old, he was appointed head of the Pacific Maritime Forces, in modern terms the commander of the fleet, and here he left a memory of himself as a tireless worker and an excellent organizer. Then Kozhanov graduated from the Naval Academy, worked in Japan as our naval attaché, and now he became commander of the Black Sea Fleet. Small in stature, thin, with quick, kind eyes, he was characterized by unusual simplicity and accessibility. He was very much loved by young people. He was his own man and a welcome guest in any sailor's cabin. Kozhanov could not, and did not want to speak beautifully, to make himself a tribune. His judgments were always specific and extremely accurate. Therefore, the reviews of exercises under the leadership of the fleet commander were characterized by instructiveness. They always analyzed in detail the tactical actions of each ship and the compound as a whole. Kozhanov could not tolerate distracted strategic reasoning. Once, when we came to review the exercise, we were surprised to see an ordinary blackboard in the hall. Then we learned that Kozhanov liked to express his thoughts graphically. The debriefing began. The floor was given to the commander of the landing ship detachment. He made a very smooth report and finished with the words, "Thus the enemy was defeated head-on." Kozhanov stood up, slowly walked to the board and calmly said, "All this is very interesting. It's just a pity that you have rolled a lot of balls, and you can't kill the enemy with them. Here, look." And, taking chalk, he sketched a scheme of the battle, quickly made calculations, and it became clear to everyone that if the battle had been real, we would have lost it for sure. Having criticized the decisions of the hapless commander, Kozhanov immediately showed us how we should have acted. It was a wonderful training, visual and convincing. Our measured life with political classes on Mondays, with the boats going out for torpedo firing on other days, with general cleaning on Saturday and obligatory rest on Sunday, was somewhat disturbed by the introduction of personal military ranks for the command staff. Previously, we differed only by service categories and wore gold patches on our sleeves depending on the position. Thus, all submarine commanders wore 4 medium patches, commanders and chiefs of staff of divisions 1 wide. New ranks were awarded by a special commission in Moscow at the People's Commissariat for Military and Naval Affairs. Lists of commanders who received ranks were published in the newspaper Red Star, which came to Sevastopol with the morning train. On the platform of the station before everyone appeared the wives of commanders. Each could not wait to be the first to know what rank was assigned to mine. In this case, there was a lot of sensation. Many major army chiefs have reduced the number of lozenges in the buttonholes, and sailors have less gilding on the sleeves. The young wives of the commanders of small had to tear from the tunics of their husbands 2 patches, because almost all commanders of small boats were promoted to the rank of senior lieutenants. I remember one morning there was a garrison meeting in the house of the Red Army and Navy. In the presidium next to the complot sat a large chief with a wide and a few medium patches, and suddenly in the hall appeared Red Star, went down the rows. The whole hall spread the news, it turns out, that this chief of his new rank is entitled to only 1 wide patch. After a break, we look, the chief is sitting with 1 patch, and all the rest hastily sporotted, only threads sticking out. Kozhanov Konflotu, nothing to spore, did not have to. He was awarded the rank of flagman of the fleet 2 rank. At our brigade, the brigade commander had 1 wide and 1 medium patch. So it remained, cut Vasily of nothing had to cut, because he received the rank of flag officer of the 2nd rank. The chief of staff of the brigade was promoted to the rank of captain 2nd rank. In those days it was considered a high rank, and I sadly parted with a wide patch, replacing it with 4 medium. Soon I was appointed commander of the 2nd Submarine Brigade. The brigade included 3 divisions. It was young compared to the 1st Brigade, but we did not want to yield in anything. From the very first days, sailors began to compete for the best performance in combat training. Boat commanders tried to make their attacks with the release of torpedoes at the fleet exercises were not worse, but better than their neighbours. The brigade staff worked amicably and fruitfully. Its chief was first an excellent expert in the submarine business, former commander of the submarine division and Wróblewski. He was replaced by a worthy successor, a little worded and very executive MG, Soloviev. Together with the commanders of the headquarters, was looking for new forms of tactical use of submarines. Krestovsky and Wróblewski proposed an original method of targeting small subs. For this, cruiser took in tow 2 or 3 little ones and went to approach the enemy. The boats were in an underwater position, maintaining telephone communication with the cruiser. Having reached the specified distance, and having received from the cruiser all the elements of the target's movement, the boats gave the tugs and began to approach it. The cruiser, meanwhile, with its maneuvers, distracted the attention of the enemy. The idea was bold. It was approved by the fleet commander. But in combat conditions, this technique was never used. The war suggested another tactic. An innovation for those years was considered to be the guidance of submarines on the radio from a surface ship. The matter was complicated by the vulnerability of the control ship. It could be the object of strikes. In addition, in order not to miss the signal, the boats had to float up every now and then, raising the antenna above the water, then could give themselves away. We gave a lot of time and effort to this tactical technique, and life in the first months of the Patriotic War showed that it is not suitable. But it would be unfair to say that our efforts were wasted. This training brought its own benefit. It later helped submariners in working out the